Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. To all my graceful audience, Assalamu alaikum. I'm Rahmat Empowerment Wala, striving to achieve self sustainability for me and for the people alike. I'm host of this interview series podcast named Empowering Minds. The objective of this podcast is to empowering minds of my audience, to call upon such prestigious guests who haven't just explored their own mindset, but are trying to empower other minds too. So, to serve the purpose, we have with us Dan Ulin. He's founder and CEO, Elite Student Coach. So let me shed some more light on Dan Yulin introduction. So we have joined by Dan Yulin straight from Los Angeles, California. Dan studied honors English and Fine Arts at University of Pennsylvania, studied MBA marketing at the Wharton School, studied clinical counseling psychology at Antioch University of Los Angeles. He has vast experience of working with prestigious organizations like Quarterdeck Corporation, Marubeni Corporation, and Panasonic. Besides being an amazing husband, true friend, and a brilliant guest of Empowering Minds, Dan Yulin is the founder and CEO of Elite Student Coach, a mentorship program that helps college bound teens gain admissions into some of the top schools in the US. He also teaches kids the art of entrepreneurship, communication, and the abilities to mentor others. So let's welcome Dan Yulin. Hi, Dan. Welcome to Empowering Minds.
Well, hi. Thank you so much for having me. Wow.
Pleasure is all mine. I'm highly obliged to host you here. Thank you so much. So, did I miss anything in your introduction? You can add.
I don't think so. I mean, first of all, again, thank you, and a big shout out to all your guests here from beautiful downtown Los Angeles, um, where it's a freezing cold, 62 degrees Fahrenheit today. No, I'm American, and while I grew up in Boston and I live in Los Angeles, and I went to college and graduate school, the first round of my graduate school in Philadelphia. And then when I moved to Los Angeles years later, earned my master's in clinical psychology, focusing really only on working with teenagers. I've been fortunate enough to live in 6 countries and work in 31, work in 31 or 32 more. Never Pakistan, however, although I'm on my way to Pakistan next month, my very first time to speak at Future Fest in Lahore. And I'm honored and very excited about that opportunity.
Yeah, we are honored and we are looking forward to welcome you and show you our hospitality here, Dan.
Thank you.
So, then me and my audience would love to know more about you. And so, walk us through the different stages of your professional journey. How would you become Dan Yulin, which you are right now?
Well, I became Daniel when my parents named me Daniel, and so that was that part of the journey. I didn't really have much choice. It was actually Daniel. I go by Daniel. So that's the answer to that first part of the question.
True.
Um, I think teaching and working with other kids was sort of hardwired into me at an early age. When I've had there are a lot of things I'm interested in life. One is music. I think you can see a couple of my guitars behind me here, and there's a piano over there. So music's always been part of my life. Although I never learned to read music. Sheet music, it's just squiggles on a page in front of me. But I had a good ear, and so over the years I played a number of nice venues, and then a lot of the most horrible piano bars you could possibly imagine in a number of countries. But I just love it. And the other hobby that's been consistent throughout my life is magic, specifically card magic. And I remember when I was 5 years old, my parents in Boston hired a magician to come perform. And I didn't like, the rabbit out of the hat and all the other stuff, but I loved the card magic. And it, I love the idea of not just amazing others, but having people find amusement, just find wonder in their lives. And that is a thread that ran throughout kind of my life and continues to. And when I was, oh gosh, when I was 11 or 12 years old, I think when I was 12 years old in the Boston area, I had the opportunity to teach 8 and 9 year olds magic. So I've actually been working with kids since I was a kid. And that pattern continued when I was in middle school, which is when here in the United States, when you're in sixth, seventh, and eighth grade, whatever the equivalent would be in your country. Um, I was working with kids, helping kids who had trouble reading or kids who had different kinds of learning disabilities um, work through their issues. I did the same thing in high school. And then I always loved writing. Writing was always something that I really loved and was good at. And I leaned into that. And when I was lucky enough to be accepted at a couple of Ivy League schools, um, but the two best, the two that had the best creative writing programs were Brown and the University of Pennsylvania. And I thought I was going to go to Brown, and I visited Penn in Philadelphia, and I knew right away that was the place for me. I think you have to visit a campus, and it's sometimes this happens with the mentees with whom I work right now. They'll have their heart set on a school, and they'll set foot on that campus. And while it may look good on paper, and it may have all the right departments, once you step onto a place, it just doesn't have the right feel. And this goes to one of my beliefs, which is that it doesn't matter where you go to school, it's about how you show up where you go to school. I think this is true in life. It doesn't matter where you work or where you go to school, or it's how you show up and what you do with what you have. But I was very fortunate to get into Penn, and they had a special creative writing program, and we were in the rare books library at Penn writing 50 pages of fiction a week. That's a lot of writing. And along the way, I really thought, well, when I come out of Penn, I'm going to end up being a teacher. This is what I want to do, but I wasn't entirely sure. And I came out of college with this wonderful offer to work in a public relations agency in New York. Well, the through line on that and everything I've done since has always been on education until I started this business about a decade ago. And at the same time that happened, I had this crazy offer come from Japan. Now, my dad had done his military service in Japan at the very end of the Korean War. The war had finished, but he was doing his military service in Japan. And so I grew up hearing these wonderful stories about Japan. And I always had these images in my mind. And this just crazy job offer came to go to Japan, to go to Osaka, Japan for 3 months and help rebuild the English language curriculum for Japanese high schools. And they offered it to me and a woman from another Ivy League school. I guess they wanted 2 Ivy Leaguers. I don't know why, but they did. And I contacted the people in New York who had offered me this great job in New York. And I said, listen, I don't want to turn down your offer, but I have this opportunity to go to Japan. And the guy in New York said, go. Like, this is a great opportunity. Spend 3 months in Osaka and come back, and the job will still be there. So I went to Osaka speaking like literally no Japanese. Now, at the time I went several decades ago, had I gone to Tokyo, where many people spoke a lot of English, I probably would never have learned Japanese. But in Osaka, in the late 80s, no, it was me and a few other foreigners, non-Japanese, and that was it. And after a couple of days of pointing at plastic food in windows and saying yum yum, and there was a lot of low dignity moments, I decided I'm just going to learn Japanese, and I did. And it's like anything else. When you want to learn something, jump into the deep end of the pool and just do it. And I love the place. And by sheer accident, I don't know, a week later, I ended up visiting a friend of mine across the street from Panasonic. So Panasonic and the Japanese Department of Education were the people who had offered me this research fellowship to come to Japan, which was supposed to be a 3-month fellowship. And across the street, I visited a friend of mine who was working in this beautiful club. And I walked in, and they had this Yamaha grand piano. And I said, do you mind if I play a little bit? I'm dying to get my hands on a piano. I haven't had a chance to play in several weeks. And I started playing. And the woman who owned the club said, look, we're looking for somebody to play every night. And, we'll give you dinner. We'll let you play. We'll pay you. And we'll, give you a taxi and send you home. Are you interested? And I mean, yes. So I took that job, and it turned out one of the members of the club was the president of Epson, the printing company, and he and I became friends. And he loved Elvis Costello and Billy Joel and Elton John, and they ended up needing a copywriter, and one thing led to another. And so after 2 years in Osaka, I was speaking only Japanese, and I got picked up as the first American at a giant Japanese multinational in Tokyo. Moved to Tokyo, but 2 more years there. One thing led to another, and one of my American clients, we were importing American software into Japan, hired me to open offices for them in Europe. And I applied to the MBA program at the Wharton School. And I never thought I would go for an MBA. I mean, if you had asked me when I was an undergraduate studying English, creative writing, Dan, do you think you'll go back for an MBA? You might as well have asked me, do you think you'll wake up with the head of a dinosaur? There would have been exactly the same chances of my doing that. But along the way, I became interested in business, but particularly in marketing and communications. Again, the focus was always on communications. And I was very lucky to be accepted to the Wharton program. And so I did that. But before I did that, and while I was in school, I was consulting for the company, the American company that I was helping to represent in Tokyo. And I opened offices for them in 5 European countries. Consulted for them while I was in Wharton. While I was in Wharton, I also fell into a teaching assistant position in which the professor unfortunately became very ill, and my fellow teaching assistant, and I ended up teaching the class in multinational marketing. And instead of having to pay, it was sort of weird teaching our fellow classmates, teaching that class, because we were, in the same grade as they were, essentially, but ended up getting paid in course credits and emerging debt-free from Wharton. And it was just a crazy thing, because I was admitted to grad school with no idea how I was going to pay for it, and then ended up being a teaching assistant. So I can officially say I taught at Wharton, and it was a blast. It was so much fun. So I moved to Europe after that, spent 3 more years in Europe building up this company, working in another, 20 countries, 25 countries, in addition to the 6 that I live in. Came back to the United States, spent a little time in DC, moved to Los Angeles, and thought, well, I'm going to be trying my hand at screenwriting. I love movies. I love writing. I think I'm going to be a screenwriter. And I wrote 3 of the worst screenplays you can imagine. Just the most horrible, just terrible, terrible screenplays you can imagine. And I was heartbroken. I thought, well, there's my dream. I was going to be a screenwriter. Oh, no. But I talked my way into, I asked one of my teachers, what would you do? And he said, well, if you talked your way into a job in Japan, playing piano, and you were able to talk your way into my office. This is a very mean man. He said, why don't you talk your way into the office of your favorite director? What's your favorite movie? And I said, Blade Runner. He said, well, Ridley Scott directed that. Find a way to talk your way into his office. See what happens. So I talked my way to Ridley Scott's office. I knew somebody who knew somebody. And I said, you don't know me from a hole in the ground. My name is Dan Ulin. I love movies. I am a terrible screenwriter, but I am really good at reading movies. And movies are investment. They're really investment properties. You read a movie script and you decide whether it's going to be a commercially viable project. And Ridley and his late brother Tony looked at me and they said, this is the stupidest pitch we have ever heard, but you have such guts coming in to talk to us. We're going to give you a job. And I said, well, I thank you, I think. And I ended up working for a couple of years. Had a blast. I just had a blast, and decided that I would rather watch movies than make them. But along the way, I really missed working with kids. So I was still here in the U.S. working as a big brother, which is here in the U.S. where you are mentoring kind of younger kids, in my case, younger men, along the way. And I ran my own marketing communications organization, helping small companies and middle-sized companies, and some very large companies. The last one was State Farm, which is a huge, not a multinational, a huge insurance company here in the United States, about a $46 billion company. But I really wanted to go back and work with kids. And so I felt that the best way to do that was to go back and earn a master's in psychology, clinical psychology. So I did. This was, 12, 15 years ago. And I worked only with teenagers. And in California, in the United States, when you decide that you are going to become a psychologist or a psychotherapist, you need to earn anywhere between 2,000 and 3,000 hours, depending on what state you're in. And in California, it's 3,000 hours. And I think I forgot how many hours I was supposed to earn, and I got to 3,500 hours. And my supervisor came to me and she said, Dan, when are you going to sit for the exam and, become a therapist or psychologist here in California? And I said, you know what? I'm not. I think I can help more people and make more money coaching and mentoring them than becoming a therapist. And that was when I opened the business that I have right now. But I had been helping friends' kids with their college applications for a while. And it's always been competitive getting into not just the Ivy League, 8 Ivy League schools, but the top 100 schools. It's always been competitive. And it's not just for kids here in the United States. Many, many kids from foreign countries, Pakistan, China, India, Japan, countries all over the world apply to come to schools here in the United States for their undergraduate educations as well as for their
Yes.
graduate education. And it's competitive, not only because there are only so many kids that these schools can take, but also because you have to fill out applications and you have to write essays. And so there's a lot of competition going on there. So about 10 years ago, when the level of competition started to go up and up and up, and it became increasingly more difficult, I decided, this pulls together everything I love about all my work. It pulls together what I love about teaching and working with young people, what I love about mentoring people. And mentoring is about helping people find the very best in themselves and kind of unlocking that and then passing that forward to other people. So the communications piece, learning to write and communicate on paper, in person, within oneself, emotional intelligence, learning to read the room. It involves mentorship, my mentoring them, but then helping them go on and mentor other people. And then, of course, there's that piece of entrepreneurship. I love marketing. I love being an entrepreneur. But we're all in business. You're in the business of being an amazing, amazing podcast host, among many other things. I'm in the business of being Daniel, and we are all, even if you're not officially a businessman or a businesswoman or something in between, you're all in the business of being who we are. And we all need to punch through the clutter. So my program pulls together the three pillars, if you will: communication, entrepreneurship, and mentorship. Of course, there's the part about, yes, let's help position your child, my mentees, so that they're able to get into the schools of their choice. But that's more of a natural byproduct of my program than the sole focus of my program. And I say this with the greatest respect to the people who are, I guess, my competitors in this business. I'm kind of a category of one because with the belief that it's not where you go, it's how you show up where you go. Yes, of course, I do want my mentees to get into their dream schools. But the very first thing I start with is, what is your dream school? Like, what is your criteria? So let's dig into that in the beginning, because very often parents and kids will come and they'll say, well, Penn, or UCLA or University of Wisconsin at Madison or something. That's our dream school. And then they'll find along the way that maybe one of those was, but something else entirely their dream school as their interests evolve in that path. And this is a wonderful journey to be along with the kids with whom I work. I call them my kids. They're not my children. I got married late in life. My wife and I don't have any children. We have 2 cats, and there's no danger our cats are going to get into Stanford and cost us $500,000. So I know that's a long explanation. I won't give my age, but I've been doing this for a long time. But I hope that kind of summarizes how I ended up
Amazing.
on this show.
You walked this really great and amazing journey you have explained us in the last 10, 12 minutes. Amazing. So, audience, if you want to get admission in international schools, he is the guy to contact for, to learn from, and should note Dan Ulin. Should contact Dan Ulin. So, there's an viewer, Osama Muhammad, is asking what type of writing you love, what genre you love to write, or you used to
Oh,
love
is this?
writing.
Oh, I see. It looks like a gentleman is asking it. So can I get some clarification on that question? Are you asking what kind of books I like to read? I'm going to assume that that's what you're asking. So I'll answer what I think is your question, then I'll unpack that a little bit. So I love all kinds of reading. The genre I love reading the most are thrillers and science fiction and horror. Now, there's a reason for that. My wife is an actress, and she is a horror and science fiction movie actress she's been in a lot of movies, and I grew up with a great love for that genre. And by horror, I'm not really talking about the slasher movies. I'm talking about some of the great thriller movies, the Hitchcock movies, and some of the great thrillers of the 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s. I love movies that have twists and turns and things like that. That said, I also have a deep love and appreciation for some of the great classics, for Shakespeare, for some of the Elizabethan poets, things like that. And I do speak a few languages, so I'm lucky enough to have read some books in other languages as well. But if you're asking me what kind of writing I love, yeah, I lean heavily into twisty tales of fiction and short stories. I love those as well. If, on the other hand, if I've misinterpreting, and the question you're asking me is, what kind of writing I love? Let me see if I can rephrase this. How do I help kids with the type of writing in the way that I most love to do. In other words, how do I take my love for writing and help the kids? Here's how I do that. I don't think as many, and I don't want to sound like the old man on the lawn saying, "Hey, kids these days." I don't know why I did that. That was a little weird. Um, Kids in the United States just don't read as much as they did anymore. I don't think it's a dying art form. I remember growing up, I read all the time. And while some kids do, it's much easier in the age of, of the iPad and the phone to be consuming that kind of content on there. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but I think there's a lot to be said for actually reading books. And here's why. I think great readers make great writers. And the more reading you do in any genre, the more you're able to just put together and contextualize how books and words go together in ways that are going to construct wonderful sentences. There's no one right way to write. And when you're applying to college or graduate school, because I do work with kids, not only high school kids or the equivalent thereof from whatever country you're coming from, who are applying to American colleges. I also work with kids once they're in college and then once they're going on to graduate school, because the nature of college work is very different. It's very different from the nature of high school work. It's different in intensity. It's different in the nature of the length of papers you're going to write. And you have to write to it a bunch of different kinds of, for lack of a better word, voices. You'll have to write some very formal papers. You'll have to write some very informal papers. And I think we all have inside us this ability to communicate. I just think for some people it comes easily. For me, it came easily. I don't want to say I'm a great writer. It just was easy for me to express my thoughts on paper. On the other hand, math and the sciences were harder for me. And the reason was that I was told very early in life, Dan, or Danny, as I was called then. I don't like to be called Danny. When I was, in first and second grade, I was told by my teachers, Danny, you're just not good at math. So I grew up believing I'm not good at math. And it wasn't until I was actually getting my MBA, earning my MBA. And when you're earning your MBA, you have to do a lot of math. And I was struggling in the classes that involved a lot of math. And I remember I was playing piano again in some horrible piano bar on the fringes of the Penn and the Wharton campus. And one of the professors whose classes I was in, it was one of those heavy duty quant classes, came in and he said, aren't you in my class and getting like a C? And I said, yeah, I am. And he said, you're playing in the key of D, right? I said, I think I am. I don't read music. He said, move that up to G sharp. And I moved it up to G sharp. And he said, you're doing incredibly complex math in your head. He said, meaning the professor, I went to the Royal Academy in London and studied music in addition to math. You may not realize it, but you're doing incredibly complex mathematics in your head. You just didn't know it. I bet you were told when you were a kid that you were not good at math. I said, yes, that's true. So he reframed it for me. And after that, I realized I am very good at math. Do I love math? I actually like math a lot right now. But here's why I'm telling you this. I think there's this beautiful quote from Michelangelo. I love this quote so much. And it said, I saw the angel alive inside the marble before I began to carve. And the reason I bring this up is that I think the way that I work with the kids with whom I work, I think we all have these abilities within ourselves that we don't recognize. Now, we may not all want to go on to become writers or mathematicians or ballet dancers or cooks, but we very often have talents that we don't recognize. A friend of mine, a former mentor, said, talent is inborn and technique is learned. And I think to a certain degree that's true, but I think many people have talents that they never awaken, they never recognize, and they never use. And I think a lot of people focus on technique and then ignore that. I think it's more of a continuum. So coming back to what I perceive may be one of the questions that you asked, and why do I love writing? It's that very often with kids who do struggle with writing, when it comes to, say, writing college applications or writing papers, I will go to the time-tested one of two things. The time-tested technique of asking them, instead of writing the paper, just tell me what it is you want to say. Like, write the way that you speak, as opposed to writing to, say, a formal voice. I want to say a formal voice, like a voice that you would write if you were writing a doctoral thesis. And when we write the way that we would actually speak, if we were talking to a friend, it just flows out more naturally, and then we can clean it up. One of the things that I've been doing recently, especially as admissions has become so competitive, is that where a lot of kids get stuck, and we assume, yes, the most important thing are grades, and grades within the subjects that you want to study. So if you want to become a STEM, science, technology, engineering and math major, you want to get great grades within those. Doesn't mean you should get Fs in history and, and English. You want to get great grades across the board, but you don't have to take a advanced placement classes in every single thing. You want to focus in, but your grades are the most important factor when it comes to applying to American colleges. Followed, yes, of course, by the SATs or the ACTs or the test equivalents. Those are not the things that are going to get you in, but they do help. The tests do help. And then, of course, the activities that you have, whether it's a sport or an activity. It doesn't have to be a sport or a musical instrument. It could be something. It could be an art form that you love. It could be cooking. One of my kids who just got into his first choice of schools, he's not an athlete. He doesn't play an instrument. He just loves to cook. And he makes arguably some of the most delicious mushroom soup and grilled steaks on the planet. And one of his essays was just about his love for cooking and how that overlaps with his love for history. It was one of the most beautiful essays I've ever seen in my life. And he crushed it and got into he doesn't want to reveal which school. I will tell you, it's one of the most competitive schools in the country. And I'm so proud of him. I can't even see straight. But I say this because sometimes small is beautiful. It's the smallest thing that can really help. And the second technique that I use when working with the kids and trying to get a year ahead of the essay writing process instead of waiting, since here in the United States, coming from outside the United States, you need to start working a little further ahead because there are more hoops to jump through in terms of applying for visas, things like that. But with the understanding that applications to colleges are due anywhere between September and the end of December for the fall matriculation for the following year, most kids end up waiting till the end of the summer, the very beginning of September, to start writing their essays for those schools. Please don't wait that long. It's much easier to start, and I'm actually starting in some cases a year and a half ahead with the kids with whom I work, not on writing the essays, but looking at what the questions are going to be for those schools. Because while the questions do change a little bit from year to year, planting those seeds a year and a half ahead of time really allows you to kind of cultivate that narrative and lean into it and say, you know what, I don't know, but this gives me some time to think about it. I think kids these days, it's very hard to be a teenager. It's very hard to be a teenager. It's very hard to live in a world in which saying, I don't know, feels embarrassing and shaming. But I don't know is a beautiful thing. As long as it's followed by, I don't know, but I want to find out, or I don't know, but let's find out together. That's otherwise, why are you going to college? If you knew everything, you wouldn't be going to college. There's a beauty in I don't know. But I think that there's a lot of fear around not knowing because we live in a world in which you kind of have to have those answers. And I like to think of the work that I'm doing with my kids and with their families, because it's a family thing. Yes, it's leaning into that. And another way to put it, that beautiful terror of not knowing, that beautiful the beautiful fear. Fear can be a really great emotion because it can help drive us forward. And so what I'm doing with some of the kids who don't want to put pen to paper or fingers to keyboard right away is I'll interview them. I'll for lack of a better term, pretend that they're on campus. Let's say they're coming to the Yale campus, and they bump into me, and I play the role of a dean of admissions at the Yale campus, and I say, okay, Rehan, thanks for visiting the campus here at Yale. Instead of writing the essay, just tell me what you want to say on the essay. And it will just spill out. And they'll say, well, I'm so relieved I don't have to write the essay. By the way, you still have to write the essay in real life, but here's the technique. The fictional you would say, well, this is what I really want to say. And I'll say, tell me a little bit more about that. And we record this in Zoom into the cloud, and next comes out. And here is much of the essay. And it's so beautiful to see this come out because then we've got this much longer runway to construct this narrative that helps push this process along. And again, with the understanding that getting into a set of colleges, there are reach colleges, which are the Harvards and the Yales and the Penns, the ones that have single-digit admission statistics. There are the target colleges, the ones that are still difficult to get into, but have slightly less stringent admission requirements. And then there are the safety colleges, which are safety schools, colleges and universities, which aren't they're great schools, but they have a wider admissions bracket. So you want to have a spectrum of schools that you're applying to, 12, 15 schools within that, 10 to 15 schools within that range. And it's very important, I think, to make sure that all of those schools are schools that you would really love to go to. I think it's also really important to realize, whether you're listening now as a potential student or as a parent or both, that it's so many kids and parents believe that they just have to do all the selling of themselves to the school. Oh, please, Dartmouth, take our several $100,000 of money on the off chance that our kid will get in and maybe major in something in which she'll, break even when they get out and get a good job and not be in debt until the time she's 50. Where, listen, these are great schools, but you have to understand these schools want kids just like you or just like yours. They only have so much room. So that's kind of like the secret, if there is a secret. You are as much the buyer as the seller. Any school would be lucky, very fortunate to have you or a child like yours on campus. And so when you start to reverse the polarity of that, and you start to think, yes, like I would prefer to go to one of these schools, but if not, that's just the karma of it. And I'm going to end up wherever you end up, wherever your child ends up, they're going to be happy and they're going to be bringing something very special to that campus. And I get asked all the time by moms and dads. And I said this with great respect to the dads. I'm a man, I'm a dad. Well, I'm a father of cats, but point being, moms are very often the gatekeepers in this process, at least here in the United States, when it comes to the plumbing and all the paperwork and everything that needs to happen here. And I get this question from moms and dads a lot, but particularly from moms. Dan, what's the secret? There has to be like a magical key or a magical secret. And there isn't a secret. I mean, yes, everybody's got great grades, but if we're all about just getting great grades and great test scores and having, great activities, everybody would get in. Part of it is demographics. Yes. I mean, if you're coming from another country, and schools do want to have representative, they don't just want everybody coming from, all white kids from New Jersey. That just doesn't make any sense. So they do want to have some distribution of that, but they also want kids who are going to be happy together and are going to really together coalesce and create a great group of kids. So when an admissions officer is reading an application, and in the old days, meaning even a few years ago, your application would get maybe 10, 12 minutes on a read. Right now, you get 3 or 4 minutes on a read. In other words, an admissions officer will spend 3 or 4 minutes reading your child's application. And that doesn't sound like a very long time, but it's plenty of time for them to absorb what they need and decide, is this going to be a good fit? And they are looking to admit kids like yours, not to not admit them. So here's the secret. Punch through the clutter. Punch through in a way that only your child could, that only you could, and make your essays just unforgettable from the beginning. I don't mean that they have to be to the person who asked me that wonderful question about what kind of writing do you like. This doesn't have to be the great American novel or the great Pakistani novel or the great, Chinese or Japanese or not, it doesn't have to be like that at all. It just has to be something very, very simple that grabs their attention. If when an admissions officer, after they've sorted and sifted and separated them and said, yes, this is a person who could do the academic work here, who's not going to be struggling and could do this. And yes, based on their activities, seems like an interesting person who could bring something to campus. It seems like they're coming from their heart. When it comes to the essays, if when they begin reading the essay, you can make them smile, laugh a little bit, or lean in and say, I just have to see the next card. I cannot, I'm so grabbed by this first sentence. I just have to see more. Your chances just went up 75, 80%. And it's not that difficult to do it. It's less about being perfect than it is about just getting it going and leaning into that. I'm going to take this risk and be a little vulnerable and lean into it. So thank you for
Amazing.
asking me that question.
Thank you, Osama Muhammad, for asking that wonderful question. And thank you for your wonderful answer, Daniel. Talking about teenagers, so I have felt this problem in my teenage, and I'm seeing that many teenagers experience this problem. So I would love to ask this from you. So how important is it to find a great mentor in the early stage of student life?
No, it's a great question. And mentorship is an old school thing. It exists a lot. It exists in Europe. It exists in Asia and South Asia, all over the world. It exists less so here in the United States. And here's why. In the old days, um, I'll use Europe as an example. You would come out of, grade school or the equivalent, and you would go an apprentice. You would go work for the cobbler or the ironsmith, and you would learn a trade there. And I was very lucky to have been mentored early in life. First by my very first Mr. Ripley, a woodworking teacher, when I was 5 years old. I was terrible at making woodworking stuff, but Mr. Ripley was just a great guy. And then most recently in magic by the late great Max Maven, who a real legend in magic. I mean, if magic were music, he would be the equivalent of, I don't know, like John Lennon. Max was not only one of the greatest magicians to ever live, one of the greatest thinkers. And I met Max quite by accident when I was like 11 years old on a cruise around Boston Harbor, when he was a then unknown magician from Boston. We were friends for decades before he passed last year. We were very, very, very dear friends. And
Sorry
I
to hear.
told Max shortly before he passed, Max, I would not have grown into the mentor that I am today had I not been mentored by you. So it wasn't just that he mentored me in magic and stagecraft and communications. He was also a brilliant pianist and a reader and just a real Renaissance person. And I want to preface the answer that I'm just about to give with another quote. I used the Michelangelo quote before, but there's another one that I really hold dear. One of my real heroes in psychology was Carl Rogers. And Carl Rogers inherited the mantle of existential psychology when it crossed the Atlantic after World War II from Viktor Frankl, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning. And Viktor Frankl survived the Nazi death camps. And when existential psychology came to the United States, Carl Rogers, who sort of inherited that and created Rogerian psychology, said two things. Just the act of being in the room is in and of itself healing for the patients, in my case, the mentees. So in the virtual room, the Zoom room. But more importantly, he said, holding your client or holding your patient, in my case, my mentees, in unconditional positive regard is an incredibly healing experience. It's an incredibly important thing. And in a world in which it's very hard to be a teenager, not only because it's a much more competitive world, but we live in a world in which it's very rare to be listened to. I mean, how many times do you see this? You see even people who really like each other, or married couples that are out to dinner and they're like, "Oh, honey, that's a great thing. I really love what you're telling me," and they're on the phone. And it's not intentional. They're not trying to be rude. It's just we live in a world full of distractions.
True.
And I think it's really rare in life to be listened to, but it's particularly rare for a teenager to be listened to by somebody other than their parent or a teacher or an authority figure or a cop or something else. And listened to as a teenager by somebody who's older, not necessarily wiser, and older, and heard and reflected back on and held in unconditional positive regard and have that feedback loop. And I say feedback loop because, yes, while I'm older than my mentees, there is a feedback system. I studied martial arts when I was in Japan. So there's the dojo system. The dojo is the martial arts school that you're in. So dojo is where there's side-to-side mentoring. And also, there are mentors. You can be mentoring somebody who is older than you. But there's this feedback loop system. Yes. And so within the scope of my program, one of the things that my mentees do is they'll pull together, for lack of a better term, a workshop in which they will teach something over the course of a half a day or 2 days or even 3 days in something they love. One of my kids recently did a workshop in poetry in which his mentees wrote 3 poems over the course of 2 days, 3 different forms. They walked away with that, a certificate in that. I think the parents paid $99 and they received a certificate, but the kid walked away with 3 different poems that he or she had created. My mentee ended up making, that weekend, he ended up making $600. That's a lot of money for a kid who's 15 years old. But here's the more important thing. What were the parents paying for? They were not only paying for the kid to learn how to write poetry, but for him to have the mentee, the younger mentee, the 8th grade mentee. My kid was in 10th grade at the time. To have that experience of working with an older mentor, and for the experience of learning how to work with him. My mentee learned how to teach something, how to mentor younger kids. He also learned how to market that. Again, I gave him a template in Canva. He created his own marketing template for that. So he marketed it, he mentored the kids, and he monetized it. So it's the market, mentor, monetize model. And then he went to the parents afterwards and said, "Thank you so much for allowing me the privilege of working with your child. I'd like to give you the entire model that I used. I'm not going to charge you for this. Here's the template that I used to market to you. Here's the curriculum that I used. And there's the certificate. There's no reason your kid can't go out and teach what he loves. I think in the case, one of his mentees loved singing. So that kid went and taught singing. My mentee now has a list of moms and dads 20 deep waiting for him to run the next one. I mean, it's a great business model, but it's also a great model in learning to pay it forward, because none of these skills, mentorship, uh, communications, uh, um, and entrepreneurship, are taught at the high school level. They're not taught at the college level. And even if you go to an undergraduate, Wharton or a Babson in Boston, they're not going to teach you these skills until you're in your second year. More importantly, they're also AI proof. I mean, AI is here to stay. And AI is wonderful. It's awesome. But these skills are going to serve you well if you're an engineer, if you're a doctor, if you are a designer, if you are a performer. Ultimately, any meaningful human endeavor involves the transfer of emotion. And these skills, when you learn them earlier on in life rather than later, are going to just jet propel you. We're taught early in life, I think, that the shortest distance between 2 points is a line from A to B. But it's not. It's when you fold space. And I try to fold space for my mentees. I do fold space for my mentees. I take things that didn't work for me earlier on and say, well, let's try this. And I try not to call mistakes. I mean, a mistake can be a mistake, but it can also be a learning opportunity. And so, to answer your question, the earlier a parent can connect, the earlier parents can connect their child with a mentor, somebody who holds them in unconditional positive regard, especially if it's along this finding college journey. But finding college and then, you know, going from exceptional to unstoppable in school and work and life, the earlier the better. I work with kids as young as those going into seventh and eighth grade now, and even kids as young as 13. It's never too early to start. And this certainly is not a sales pitch for my business. I only work one-on-one. So I do not have a team working underneath me. I only work one-on-one. And again, I said this before, with the greatest respect to other people in the college prep business, which is only a part of what I do. It wasn't that I looked at the ones operating in the United States and the few operating in Europe and the couple in Asia. It wasn't that I looked at them and said, they're doing it this way. Daniel Ulin, am going to do it this way so that I'm different. I just don't know any other way to do it. This is the only model that I know. And we all stand on the shoulders of giants, right? We've all heard that saying before. I stand on the shoulders of Max, my mentor, and my grandfather, and my parents, my late father, and my mom, who's still alive, and the people I learned from before. My mentees stand on my shoulders, and I just told you about the workshops. Their mentees stand on theirs. So I'll ask this to the kids out there right now who are thinking about college, and to the parents listening: who's going to stand on your shoulder? Who's going to stand on your kids' shoulders going forward? That's the question. Ultimately, I think we are all. There's always money around us. There's always more money. We can attract money, but I think money swims in the wake of doing things that we love, that are meaningful to us, and that ultimately that we are here to create wonderful memories and experiences for ourselves and for other people. There's an amazing movie that came out, I guess, 18 years ago, maybe, called Inception. And the character in Inception, played by DiCaprio, says the most impossible thing to remove is an idea or a memory. Once it's planted, you can never erase it. And so, to the degree that we are here to create experiences for ourselves and for other people and plant those, we can certainly monetize those. There's nothing wrong. Money's great, but it becomes a lot easier to attract that and monetize that and pass that on to other people when I can identify early on, here are the things that I like and that I think I'm good at. Here's some things that I'd like to try. So you may be in eighth grade and decide, wow, I want to try swimming. Maybe that's something that I'd be good at. You may find right away, I don't like swimming. That's a great time to quit. I'm not saying be a quitter, but if you're going to try something and quit, start when you're 12, 13, 14 years old, as opposed to down the line. Get good at a few things. Get good and fall in love with a few things, and really commit to them. And never be afraid to take that shot. One of my heroes in life, although not a great hockey player, I grew up in freezing cold Boston. I played hockey. But Wayne Gretzky said this. He said, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Take that shot. Do not be afraid to take that shot. They can always say no, but you will never know unless you take that shot and give the opportunity for the other person to say yes.
Wonderful quote to end your answer. Amazing, Daniel. Uh, on your website, I was visiting. One of Warren Buffett's quote really grabbed my attention. You have mentioned there. The one easy way to become worth 50% more than you are now, at least, is to hone your communication skills, both written and verbal. So, million dollar question arises here: that how one can polish these communication skills. What would you suggest?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and Warren Buffett knows a thing or two about making money. One of the things I also admire so much about Buffett is that while he's a billionaire many times over, he still lives in the house that he bought for not a lot of money, decades ago. He's very, very good with money and very good with kind of the thoughts that go behind that. Again, this is one of the three pillars of my program. Becoming a great communicator is about practicing those skills. It's practicing right. It's not just about writing and practicing writing for essays for school. The kinds of essays that you write in school are very different from the kind of essays you're going to write. To get into college. Um, it's about practicing. It's about learning to talk to different kinds of people. It's about getting onto stages. A stage could be something as simple as ask your all kids are going to be put in at some point in front of the class and asked to speak. Public speaking is among the number one fear that almost everybody has. Like
True.
everybody has. And I'm about to, next month I have the great privilege of being in Lahore and speaking in Lahore. And I used to be, although I've been on many, many stages, um, terrified. And I will admit that even every time, and I've been on so many stages as a performer and as a pianist, and I'm always a little bit terrified before, but you lean into that. So, in answer to your question, you just practice. You get a little bit better each time. And also admitting that you're a little bit afraid and leaning into that can be great. I remember there was a presentation I had to give. This was 20 years ago. And a company that I was doing when I was then doing corporate communications said, we need you in San Francisco tomorrow. And I asked, how big will the audience be? And they said, it'll be 20, 30 people. But we'll have the laptop ready, all the AV will be set up, it'll be perfect, ready to go. I said, is there a topic? And they said, we're not sure, but it'll be ready to go. It'll be something related to marketing and communications, and you've got this. I said, great. And I arrived, and there were 2,000 people in the audience. And now speaking to 20 is no different from speaking to 2,000, but it becomes a problem when the second I turned on the laptop, it died. Like nothing, I had nothing at all. Mic is dead. I've got 2,000 people. I mean, they're friendly people, but I got 3 hours to fill. So I started by saying, I got to tell you, I'm a little bit nervous, but let's do this. And we had a blast. I mean, I leaned to what it was they wanted. I said, I know that I'm here talking to you. We all work in the same company. What would be most useful for you today? And here's why. Nobody expects perfection, right? People want to relate to other people who are human, not perfect. And
True.
imperfection is a beautiful thing. So I would say that becoming a great communicator is, yes, about practicing skills on being on stage and blocking and using using your hands. I'm using my hands a little too much to emphasize the point right now. Nobody wants to talk to somebody who's a robot like this on stage. Nor does anybody want to relate to. We've always seen these presenters on stage who are so perfect and so polished. When you're in the audience, you want to relate to that person. You want to relate to somebody who's real, because
True.
we all care about ourselves. It's not that we're selfish. We are creatures of self-interest, and we want to know. And this is important for people who are learning to communicate. Think about what is in it for the person that you are talking to. There's a great book that came out, I think, in the 20s in the States by. Read this book. You can find it online. It's called How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. And Carnegie's main principle was, if you want to really become interesting to other people, ask them about themselves. Ask them, talk to them about themselves. People want to talk about themselves. How many times have you been in a conversation with somebody and they ask you your name and they've forgotten it immediately, but they never ask you a single question about themselves? Be interesting by becoming interested in other folks. So
Amazing.
I hope this has been helpful today. I realize we have a reasonably short runway. Um, may I ask you a question, my dear host? Can I
Yeah,
ask you a question?
go ahead.
Uh,
Yes, sure.
Given that we have limited time today, uh, would it be rude of me to ask for you to invite me back when we have a little bit longer to speak? Would that be all right?
Absolutely, no problem.
because I have a commitment that I need to run for now.
I understand. I understand.
But assuming your audience has more questions, or I could be of service later on, I'd love the opportunity to come back and dig more deeply into questions that your audience has, or be of any further service. Was this helpful for you today?
Okay. No problem. We have reached to a limit time, and I know you have, more stuff to do. So thank you so much, Dan Yulin, for your wonderful presence here and the pearls of wisdom you have shared with us. That was amazing, and I'm really, honored to have you here and host you in Empowering Minds. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. And listen, if I can be of any help, it's elitestudentcoach.com. Reach out. There's an application form on there, but reach out and let's have a conversation. My email address is on there. You can reach me through our wonderful host here. And if I didn't have another teenager who I was about to speak with right now, I'd be happy to stay on all day with you. But if you'll have me back, I'm more than happy to come on and answer any questions that you or your beautiful audience has. Sound
Great.
good?
Thank you. Very good.
Thank
Fantastic.
you so much for your time. Blessings. I wish you all a wonderful rest of your week, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
Inshallah. Thank you so much, Dan.
Bye.
So, audience, that was Dan Yulin. I hope you enjoyed his talk and this session as I much as you did. So, I'll see you next time and with next guest. Keep doing amazing things. Have a good night. Bye.
Bye, everybody.